The daily ritual. The first time David Mitchell noticed her, she was sitting in the corner booth of Morning Brew Café, staring out the rain-streaked window with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the wooden table, and she clutched an empty coffee cup as if it were her lifeline to normalcy. Something about her stillness in the bustling cafe caught his attention, and he found himself glancing over repeatedly while pretending to read his morning paper. David was a creature of habit. Every weekday at 7:30 sharp, he'd walk into Morning Brew, order his large black coffee and whole wheat bagel, exchange pleasantries with Janet, the owner, and settle into his usual spot by the counter. He'd review architectural blueprints for 30 minutes before heading to his firm downtown. This routine had sustained him for 3 years, ever since his divorce, providing the structure he desperately needed to rebuild his life. But this Tuesday morning felt different. The woman in the corner looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the same faded blue sweater he'd noticed yesterday. Most troubling was the way she sat perfectly still, as if moving might shatter something fragile inside her. "Excuse me." David found himself walking over before his rational mind could stop him. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you like another coffee?" "You look like you could use one." She looked up sharply, her brown eyes wide with what seemed like panic. For a moment, he thought she might bolt from the cafe entirely. Then her expression softened slightly, though wariness remained. I don't have money for coffee right now," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the morning chatter. "My treat," David said gently. No strings attached. "I'm David, by the way." She hesitated, studying his face as if trying to determine his motives. "Sophie," she finally said. "And thank you." "That's very kind." David returned with a steaming mug of the cafe's signature dark roast and a blueberry muffin. "Janet makes the best muffins in the city," he said, placing both in front of Sophie. "I figured you might be hungry too." Sophie's eyes welled up slightly, and she quickly looked away. "You really didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," David replied simply. "Mind if I ask what brings you here so early every day?" "You've noticed me before?" Sophie seemed surprised. "Hard not to. You have this way of sitting very still, like you're thinking about important things." David smiled. "I'm an architect, so I notice how people interact with spaces." "You seem like someone who needs this place." Sophie nodded slowly. "It's peaceful here. Feels safe." She took a sip of coffee and closed her eyes briefly. "This tastes like hope." That phrase stayed with David throughout the day. When he returned the next morning, Sophie was there again. Same corner booth, same faded sweater. Without hesitation, he bought 2 coffees and joined her. "You came back," Sophie observed, accepting the coffee with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I told you I'm a creature of habit. Now buying you coffee is part of my routine." David sat across from her, noting how she instinctively tensed when anyone walked too close to their table. "Do you work around here?" "Not exactly," Sophie said evasively. "I'm between things right now, going through a transition period." David sensed there was more to the story but didn't push. Instead, they talked about safe topics: the weather, the coffee shop's regulars, David's work designing sustainable housing. Sophie listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a sharp intelligence beneath her guarded exterior. This became their routine. Every morning, David would arrive to find Sophie already waiting, and they'd share coffee and conversation. Slowly, she began to relax around him. Her smiles came easier, her laughter more genuine. She started eating the pastries he brought without protest, and color returned to her cheeks. "I used to be a teacher," Sophie confided during their second week of morning meetings. "Elementary school. I loved working with kids, helping them discover how amazing the world could be." "Used to be?" David asked gently. Sophie's expression darkened. "Things changed. I had to leave." She quickly changed the subject, asking about his latest project designing a community center. David found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his day. Sophie was brilliant, funny when she let her guard down, and deeply compassionate. She remembered details about his work, asked about his elderly neighbor who'd been sick, and somehow always knew exactly what to say when he mentioned feeling overwhelmed by a particularly challenging design problem. You're a good listener, David told her one morning. Teaching was definitely the right profession for you. Was, Sophie corrected quietly. That life is over now. Maybe it doesn't have to be, David suggested. People can start over, build new lives. Sophie looked at him with an expression so sad it made his chest ache. Not everyone gets that chance, David. Some mistakes can't be undone. 3 weeks into their daily ritual, David realized he was falling for her. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was lovely when she smiled. It was her resilience, the way she found small joys in simple things, her obvious intelligence, and the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. He found himself wanting to protect her from whatever had hurt her so badly. Sophie, he said one morning, working up his courage. I know we haven't known each other long, but I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. You deserve to be treated well. Sophie's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. David, I can't. You don't understand. Then help me understand, David said earnestly. I care about you. I can see you're going through something difficult. But whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone. For a moment, Sophie looked like she might tell him everything. Her eyes searched his face, and he could see her internal struggle. Then she shook her head firmly. You're a wonderful man, David. Truly. But I can't drag you into my problems. They're bigger than you realize. Try me, David said. I'm stronger than I look. Sophie stood abruptly, leaving her coffee half-finished. I should go. Sophie, wait. But she was already hurrying toward the door. David watched through the window as she disappeared down the street. Her shoulders hunched against more than just the morning chill. The next morning, David arrived at Morning Brew with a mix of hope and anxiety. Sophie's corner booth was empty. He waited until 9 o'clock, but she never appeared. Janet noticed his distraction. Looking for your friend? The older woman asked kindly. Yeah, we had a misunderstanding yesterday. David sighed. I probably pushed too hard. That girl's been through something, Janet observed. I can always tell. But she lights up when she talks to you. First time I've seen her really smile since she started coming here. How long has she been coming here? David asked. About a month now. Always orders the cheapest thing on the menu, makes it last for hours. Until you started buying her coffee, I was worried she wasn't eating enough. Janet refilled David's cup. Whatever's going on with her, she trusts you. That's not nothing. David spent the day distracted, unable to focus on his blueprints. He kept thinking about the fear in Sophie's eyes, the way she'd said her problems were bigger than he realized. What kind of trouble could a former elementary school teacher be in? The next morning, Sophie still didn't appear. David bought 2 coffees anyway, hoping. On the 3rd day of her absence, he was beginning to fear she'd left town entirely when he spotted her across the street, standing in front of a small bookstore. She was scanning the area nervously as if checking for someone. David crossed the street quickly. Sophie, I've been worried about you. She spun around, relief and apprehension warring on her face. David, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Not safe? What are you talking about? David looked around the quiet street, seeing nothing threatening. You don't understand, Sophie said urgently. There are people looking for me. Bad people. If they see us together, then let me help you, David said firmly. Whatever this is, we can figure it out together. Sophie's resolve seemed to crumble. She looked so tired, so alone. You really want to know? She asked quietly. Yes, David said without hesitation. Sophie glanced around once more, then made a decision that would change everything. Meet me at my apartment tonight. 7 o'clock. She pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand with her address. Come alone and David? If anyone asks about me, you've never seen me before in your life. As she walked away, David unfolded the paper. Along with the address, she'd written, I'm sorry for what you're about to learn. The revelation. David stood outside the modest apartment building, checking the address for the 3rd time. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with old brick buildings that had seen better days. Sophie's apartment was on the 2nd floor of a converted brownstone, and as he climbed the narrow stairs, he could hear muffled voices from behind her door. He knocked softly, and the voices stopped immediately. After a long pause, Sophie opened the door just wide enough to see him, her face pale and drawn. You came, she said, sounding both grateful and terrified. Of course I came. David stepped inside and immediately noticed another woman sitting on the small couch, younger than Sophie, with similar features but brighter eyes that held less weariness. "David, this is my sister Emma," Sophie said quietly. "Emma, this is David, the man I told you about." Emma stood and extended her hand. "The coffee shop guy. Sophie talks about you constantly." "Emma," Sophie warned, her cheeks flushing. David shook Emma's hand, noting how she studied him carefully, as if evaluating whether he could be trusted. The apartment was sparse but clean, with packed boxes stacked against one wall and very little furniture. It looked like a temporary hideout rather than a home. "Sophie, what's going on?" David asked gently. "You said people were looking for you, that it wasn't safe. Are you in some kind of witness protection?" Sophie and Emma exchanged glances. Emma nodded encouragingly. "Sit down," Sophie said, gesturing to the worn armchair. "This is going to be difficult to explain." David sat, his heart racing. Whatever Sophie was about to tell him, he could see it was tearing her apart. "You know I told you I used to be a teacher," Sophie began, pacing near the window. "That was true. I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary for 5 years. I loved those kids more than anything." "What happened?" David asked when she paused. "There was a man," Sophie continued, her voice growing quieter. "Principal Thompson. He seemed like a good leader at first, passionate about education, always talking about putting children first. But gradually I started noticing things, small things that didn't add up." Emma leaned forward. "Tell him about the budget discrepancies." Sophie nodded. The school was supposed to be getting state funding for new computers, new textbooks, improved nutrition programs. But nothing ever materialized. Thompson always had excuses: delays, bureaucratic red tape, budget cuts. Meanwhile, he was driving a new Mercedes and taking expensive vacations. "You suspected he was embezzling," David said. "More than suspected. I started documenting everything. Financial records I wasn't supposed to have access to, conversations I overheard, suspicious vendor contracts." Sophie pulled a manila folder from one of the boxes. "It took me months to piece it together. But Thompson was stealing nearly $200,000 a year meant for those children." David whistled softly. "That's serious fraud." "It gets worse," Emma interjected. "Tell him about the threats." Sophie's hands were shaking now. "When Thompson realized I was getting close to the truth, he started threatening me. Subtle at first. Comments about how unfortunate it would be if I lost my job, how difficult it could be for someone to find work if they developed a reputation as a troublemaker." "But you didn't stop investigating," David guessed. "I couldn't. Those kids deserved better. Their families trusted the school system to provide what their tax dollars paid for. So I kept digging, and I found something even worse." Sophie's voice broke slightly. Thompson wasn't working alone. The superintendent, 2 school board members, even the district's head of purchasing, they were all in on it. It was a massive conspiracy spanning years. David felt a chill run down his spine. "What did you do?" "I gathered all my evidence and took it to the district attorney's office. I thought I was doing the right thing, that justice would be served." Sophie sat heavily on the edge of the couch. "I was so naive. What happened?" David asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. "Emma took over the story. The DA's office promised to investigate, said they'd protect Sophie as a whistleblower. But somehow, within 24 hours, Thompson and his associates knew exactly what evidence Sophie had provided. There was a leak," Sophie continued. "Someone in the DA's office tipped them off. That night, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't steal anything, but they left a message spray-painted on my bedroom wall. 'Stop digging or stop breathing.'" David's hands clenched into fists. "They threatened your life?" "That was just the beginning," Sophie said bitterly. "Over the next week, my car tires were slashed. I received dozens of anonymous threatening phone calls, and someone sent photos of me leaving my apartment to my work email with messages about how easy it would be to make me disappear." "Please tell me you went to the police," David said. "I tried," Sophie replied, "but every report I filed seemed to vanish into thin air. I started to realize that Thompson's corruption network extended into law enforcement, too. I was completely alone." Emma reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "That's when Sophie called me. I drove up from California to help her figure out what to do. We decided I had to disappear, Sophie explained. The threats were escalating, and I started noticing the same car following me everywhere. One morning, I found a dead cat on my doorstep with a note saying, "You're next." David felt sick. "So you've been hiding ever since?" "For 2 months now. Emma helped me create a new identity, Sophie Chen instead of Sophie Rodriguez. We found this apartment, paid cash for everything, stayed off all digital grids. The plan was to lay low until we could figure out how to expose Thompson safely." "But the coffee shop," David said. "Why did you risk going there every day?" Sophie smiled sadly. "Because I was going crazy cooped up in here. The cafe felt safe, public but not too crowded, cash-only transactions, far enough from my old neighborhood. I told myself I was being careful. And then I came along and started drawing attention to you," David said, understanding flooding through him. "Actually, you probably saved my life," Sophie said quietly. 3 days ago, the same day you asked me to dinner, I spotted one of Thompson's associates in the coffee shop. I think they'd finally track me down." David's blood ran cold. "That's why you disappeared. I couldn't put you at risk. If they saw us together, they might target you too." Sophie looked directly at him. "I should have told you to forget about me completely, but I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing you again." Despite the gravity of the situation, David felt his heart skip. "Sophie, there's more," Emma interrupted. "Tell him about Detective Harrison." Sophie took a deep breath. "Yesterday, a detective from Internal Affairs contacted me through a secure channel Emma set up. Detective Harrison has been conducting his own investigation into corruption in the school district and the DA's office. He says they've been building a case for months, but they needed someone with inside knowledge. He wants Sophie to testify," Emma explained. "But it means coming out of hiding, facing Thompson's people in court, risking everything." David stood and began pacing, his architect's mind working through the problem. "What kind of protection can this detective offer?" "Witness protection, eventual relocation if necessary." "But he was honest about the risks," Sophie said. "These people have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their secrets." "What are you going to do?" David asked. Sophie looked at him with eyes full of uncertainty. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run, change my name again, start over somewhere far away. But those children are still being cheated. More teachers might discover the truth and face the same threats I did. If I don't speak up, Thompson and his network will keep stealing from kids who desperately need those resources." David sat back down, reaching for Sophie's hands. "What does your heart tell you?" "That I have to testify," Sophie said immediately. "Those kids deserve justice, and I'm the only one with enough evidence to make sure they get it." "Then that's what you'll do," David said firmly. "And you won't do it alone." Sophie's eyes widened. "David, no. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." David squeezed her hands gently. "You've been carrying this burden alone for months, but you don't have to anymore. I'm going to help you see this through." Emma smiled for the first time since David had arrived. "I like him," she told Sophie. "It's dangerous," Sophie warned David. "If you're associated with me, they might come after you too." "Let them try," David said with a confidence that surprised him. "I've fallen in love with the most courageous woman I've ever met. I'm not walking away now." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "You love me? Even knowing all this?" "Especially knowing all this," David replied. "You risked everything to protect children who couldn't protect themselves. You've shown more integrity in this mess than most people show in a lifetime. How could I not love you?" 3 days later, David sat in a courthouse waiting room, holding Sophie's hand while Detective Harrison reviewed her testimony one final time. The past few days had been a whirlwind of preparation, security briefings, and emotional conversations about the future. "Whatever happens in there," David whispered to Sophie, "I'm proud of you." Sophie squeezed his hand. "I'm still scared. That's okay. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing despite being scared." Detective Harrison approached them. "Sophie, they're ready for you." As Sophie stood to face the grand jury that would determine whether Thompson and his associates would stand trial, David realized that their morning coffee ritual had led to something neither of them had expected. Not just love, but the chance to fight for justice together. 6 months later, David and Sophie sat in their favorite corner booth at Morning Brew Café, reading news coverage of Thompson's conviction. The corruption network had been completely dismantled, resulting in over $2 million being recovered for the school district. "Any regrets?" David asked, watching Sophie smile at a photo of Lincoln Elementary students with their new computers. "Only that I didn't trust you with the truth sooner," Sophie replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. "Turns out some secrets are meant to be shared." Janet approached with their usual order, 2 coffees and a blueberry muffin to share. "You two still make the cutest couple in here," she said warmly. As they settled into comfortable conversation about Sophie's new job at a different school and David's latest community center design, both of them marveled at how a simple act of kindness over coffee had led them to this moment. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the smallest gestures and grow through the sharing of the biggest truths.